Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's TMC Round Table. Our focus today is on sustaining change momentum, and we are very excited to have you joining us today. I am Lynne. I'm the Managing Director of Client Services for TMC, and I'm joined here as the moderators for today's session with Ken Ballinger, our Managing Director. Ken, you want to say a few words?
Thanks, Lynn. Yeah, Ken Ballinger, Managing Director of TMC. Happy to be here today and to be part of such a relevant topic for business and operating in a global environment around sustaining change momentum. Thanks, Lynn.
Super. So with that, we are going to hand it over to our guest speakers today. We are really pleased to partner with T-Systems, and Karen, Eden, and Fiona are going to be walking us through what they have done to sustain change momentum in T-Systems International. So let me hand it over to Karen.
Thank you very much, Lynn. Thank you very much, Ken. That's great. And thank you for the opportunity to speak with you and the wider audience today. That's very much appreciated. So, Karen Eden, I don't look like that anymore. I used to once. So this is quite an old picture. I'm at T-Systems International. T-Systems is part of the wider telecom organisation with 230,000 employees. And T-Systems has about 53,000 employees, to give you an indication there. So, working in this company 4 years, looking at culture change and collaboration topics, and have about 17 years experience in this topic overall, and working very closely with my colleague Fiona, who's on the line. I'll introduce Fiona. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Karen. Hi, everyone. Yeah, so I've been working as a project manager for quite a large amount of time across various industries across South Africa. And I joined Karen in 2012 to help her in implementing and supporting communities and culture change initiatives across the company. I am based in South Africa and very much living the virtual working experience. And with that, I can say we really do practice what we preach.
So just a quick note, this is Lynn, to reduce the background noise. We have muted all participants, but let us know if you have a question in the question box, and we will be happy to take you off mute so you can ask your question directly to Karen and Fiona. All right, so let's move to the next one. And we are recording today's session, so we will make sure to post it on the TM Corp site after today's session. So you are welcome to reflect on that and share the broadcast with anybody that you would like to. So that's it. Back to you, Karen.
Thank you very much, Lynn. Okay, so just to bring a little bit of context to why we're doing change and what we're thinking about in T-Systems. And as I said, we are part of the wider telecom group. And I put this picture up as a page from a recent study that Telecom has done with the support around with St. Gallen around the changing world and the working population and what is happening in the future. For us, we've seen for a long time there is a lot of change coming, and the working place is different, and the environments are different, the ways that people are working are different, the landscape of employees and their behaviours and the needs and the tools are changing things. So this report is available worldwide. You can have a look at that. I'll show you the link of that shortly. If you take to the next slide, Fiona, if we look at the changing workplace, digitalisation is really having a huge dramatic effect on the way that we work. So on the next slide, you can see we're looking at machines replacing humans, and we're looking at customers cooperating with computers. Companies are changing, they're going away, employees are working differently, hierarchies are changing. So there is a huge amount of things that are happening, and we've seen this really now for a long time. And within companies, what we're seeing is a change in the landscape of HR and the way that we do work, skill people, bring people together. So within T-Systems in the last few years, we've been focusing on a couple of change activities to really help us move forward in the changing landscape. What we're going to do before we jump into what we're actually doing, though, we wanted to actually spend a little bit of time to get your views on some of the things. So we had a little bit of an idea to do some brainstorming with you. So hopefully that you are engaged with us, and your fingers are ready and your fingertips are ready. And I think Fiona's going to explain to you now how we can do that brainstorming activity with you.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Karen. So you will see on your screen a slide that explains the question panel. We will be using the question panel for a question or answer. If you could please ensure that you press the send to all button at the bottom so that we can all get a view of what you're thinking. We're going to be starting a quick brainstorm session. We will have 60 seconds where we've opened this question up, and the question will be, what challenges do you face driving change across distance and cultures? So you have 60 seconds to get those fingers moving, and we hope to see some interesting comments from you. The countdown has now started.
Not seeing many questions coming through there in the poll.
Okay.
So do we have any?
Perfect. Great, I can see some coming through. That's good. Okay, and we finished. Very few comments. So, Karen, I can just look through and give you a brief overview anyway. Lot of perception difference in perception in how change is viewed. There is obviously the positive, negative, and I really like the comment on fear, because of course that is one of the major feelings that we encounter driving change across distance and cultures.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think what we recognised within T-Systems is in dialogue, in the business, in seeing it having come from previous experience, we put into place some activities to try and address some of the activities that needed to take place to globalise us as a company, to make us more intercultural. And so there's two initiatives, and we as a central team in T-Systems reporting into the HR director, we've got high visibility across the organisation. We work entirely across T-Systems. We drive two main topics: to develop an open and international culture where people can collaborate. This is hard in our company to do, to enable collaboration. We're still on a learning landscape at the moment in this area. The world is changing fast, faster than perhaps we can implement new technologies or we can change behaviours. But what I would say is we're in a good way with it now, and I think this is because we started this quite young, and we're actually providing a lot of input to the wider telecom in these topics. So we have two actual activities that we're doing. If we start on the right-hand side, this is communities of practice. Well, you probably hear quite a lot about informal learning, maybe the theory of 70-20-10, so 70% informal learning, 20 coaching, and 10 formal learning. And communities of practice really enable informal learning across the organisation, working across hierarchies. And coming from our company, we are quite hierarchical, so this is a mechanism that we really needed a strong structure in place, which we've done quite well to achieve. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. The other initiative on the left, once people start to get into communities and they're doing this work, they have then hit a number of different challenges. And I think, you know, in the blog you pointed that out: cultural differences, fear, negative, positive. And therefore we put in place an initiative called Working Virtually. The good news is for you, that's something you can all use. And I will let Fiona enhance on that topic more rather than take away her planned comments about that activity. So they're the two things in T-Systems that we're driving globally across T-Systems, and also now being taken in various areas across telecom as well.
Great, thanks, Karen. Yeah, so Karen already touched on some of the high-level issues around working virtually and working in a virtual environment. If we look at all that it encompasses, there's really a very high level of interrelatedness between a lot of the topics that we encounter. If you see on the screen, we already touched on cultural difference in how things are viewed. And if we look at culture, there's very much a link between trust, conflict management, communication. So if you try and build common identity and understanding within a team, you need to have those trusting relationships present in order to prevent conflict and build deeper intercultural awareness. This extends even to virtual leadership, where leading across distance, you'd need to have a team where there is trust, conflict is dealt with effectively through effective communication. You need to also look at your tools and technologies and how that fits into the global picture. What is really important to us that came out of looking at all the topics in working virtually is that it's only when these are clear and we understand the impact they all have on each other, can we work more effectively and more efficiently in the virtual environment. So to elaborate on the example from earlier, if there is no trust, if you are not managing conflict, if you are not communicating, you're not going to result in an effective and efficient and well-functioning virtual team. So this just gives us some food for thought in terms of looking at the landscape of working virtually. To take you on to more detail in the program, what we have developed within the framework for working virtually across T-Systems are some very specific tools that can help in growing our virtual capabilities. These are the on-demand video series that I will speak more in detail about now, our working virtually community, our champions, and of course, the inclusion of the Cultural Navigator tool. So let's take a look at these now in some detail. You will see a screenshot of our working virtually portal on your screen. You will notice, firstly, that this is available online on the World Wide Web for everyone to use. The portal focuses on the 8 interdependent topics that you saw on the previous slide. So, of course, trust, conflict management, and so on. There are 36 videos at the moment, and they are between 10 to 25 minutes long, so short enough to have users pop in and out of them. In addition, the videos also include reflection questions, very similar to what we just experienced in the brainstorming session, as well as live examples for where a specific challenge, obstacle, or example can be encountered. The videos are in English with German subtitles. Obviously, a huge portion of the organization is based in Europe, and with the German history of the country, it only makes sense to do that, to include everyone. There is a one-page summary available on the portal that users can download for a brief summary of the content from each video. And then included in the portal is a section for intercultural awareness, where we introduce the topic of intercultural awareness as well as the Cultural Navigator. And I will speak more in depth about the Cultural Navigator in a few minutes, but what is important to note here is that we have customized some T-Systems specific learning paths for our employees to go through in order to develop in specific areas. So that's it in a nutshell. I'd like to now show you what our online community looks like. So our online community is available in the Telecom Social Network, and this is our group-wide enterprise social tool for all our company employees. This means that anyone around the world can log on to this tool and join the community. It's in this space that people connect around the topic of working virtually to share their experiences, overcome challenges together, and also share best practices and lessons learned. So a really nice interactive and collaborative space. And the community is specifically structured to make learning and sharing the topic very easy. We have as the core of our Working Virtually community, our Working Virtually champions. These are employees that come from different areas of the business, different levels across the organization, and also from different countries and therefore cultures. And part of our community launch was including our champion concept, where the champion specifically multiply the use and success of not only the Working Virtually platform, but also the Cultural Navigator. And just as a note there, they go through very structured learning to deep dive into the topics of both virtual working and intercultural awareness. And we're currently in our second round of champion training. So that's really nice to be able to share. The main areas in our community include our calendar at the top right, that you'll be able to see with the events. And this is where we share our weekly call schedules. We have weekly calls for collaborative learning and sharing, with monthly calls certified for the champions themselves. Under the topics button in the main page, you will see we link directly to all of our content in the Working Virtually portal. The community is very open and transparent, and we therefore share all of our event content from previous sessions and from what we're doing to support the topic. We have specific topic buttons for communities, and then while we've put a whole lot in there, I want to focus on the toolkit that we've developed in the background. And this was really something that started in an attempt to support the Working Virtually champions multiply the topic, but I think it's really picked up a lot of use from users on the site. And what we have in there is items that support the Cultural Navigator, so presentations that we've used, guides around using the Cultural Navigator tool itself, and various worksheets that TMC have very kindly supported us with when we've done those sessions. There is a marketing pack that we provide for all, where they're able to self-print that, and also includes materials that are specifically developed by our champions for use when they are sharing the topic. Very importantly, because it's been a very strong element in how we rolled out the initiative, is communications pack. So we've provided templates of branding, imaging, surveys, as well as our one-pages for use by all people who want to share the topic. Very importantly, what we have together with the champions designed is a presentation template that allows them very easily to be able to speak about the topic and share the information if they are going to be either in a team meeting or sharing the information in some setting across the organization. In addition to that, we have recommendations for multiplying the topic, and Karen has been fortunate enough to be at some marketplaces across T-Systems where she's been able to engage in marketing booths for specific events that promote working virtually in communities and the Cultural Navigator as well as communities of practice. So we share a lot of what has been done there. I just want to ask if there are any questions or comments at this stage before I move on to the next slide.
So Fiona, this is Lynne. Just a quick question, and maybe we'll address it later, but love to hear how you got agreement to implement the Working Virtually initiative in T-Systems. What did you do to generate that agreement at the top level?
Karen, I think if you could take this one.
Yeah, sure I can. So actually we started this concept about 4.5 years ago, and it was very clear from some research and looking around the company there was quite a few things to do. So we did a grassroots up evaluation, and then we involved a lot of middle management into that input, and we defined the scope for it. And basically that chaos slide that you saw, the one with all the arrows on, there's actually a much more detailed version of that slide, which is too detailed to show on a WebEx, which shows the independencies between the topic. When we could articulate, that slide really helped to articulate the difference. So to get the agreement, this slide was a really huge thing, and to make people understand the complexity of the topic. We also at this point could convince them very easily that we needed to do this learning internally, because the messaging, the culture, and the way that we talk about things in the company have very specific ways of being discussed, so we needed to address that. So those 2 points were quite big for us. We brought it to the Board of Management. They all agreed that we should fund it, and they gave us the money to do it and the resource, and they let us get on with it, and we were very supported in that. So without having that top level approval, we wouldn't have gone anywhere, but we would also need this grassroots feedback that we had and to demonstrate the complexity of it. And that was very well brought in. So that's actually how we got the agreement for the topic, yeah.
Thank you. Really well done. So thank you. Let's go back to you, Fiona, or Karen.
Right, I'll take us through to the next slide. On the screen, you'll see a screenshot of our Cultural Navigator in T-Systems. And what we really focused on here is for all of our employees to gain awareness and understanding of their own and each other's preferences, with the main aim of enabling and building effective collaborative intercultural relationships. And that sounds like a tall order, but lucky enough, with the help of TMC, we were able to do that. Our Cultural Navigator has very customized learning paths included in the Cultures at T-Systems section that you will see on your screen. And what we created there is very specific on-demand learning that specific areas of the business could embark on in order to increase their intercultural awareness and their cultural competence. We focus very much on not only the individual person, but also from a leadership point of view, as well as developing a team, and then of course added for our community portion, as well as developing talents in the organization. What is really great about these is that they blend both the video resources that we have and the existing Cultural Navigator resources that occur on the tool. So a person would be able to follow a very specific path that would help them grow using the video resources as well as the Cultural Navigator resources which include our guiding principles and also our leadership principles for the organization. And it was very important for us that we blended these throughout so that there are behaviors and principles that are emphasized by both tools when users are going through their chosen learning path. So that's a quick look at that. I just want to check again if there are any questions before I move on.
Not at this point. Let's move on. We do have some questions that may be more appropriate at the end.
Okay, great. So over to you, Karen.
Thanks very much, Fiona. So communities of practice, you saw this slide earlier, just to recap on our two initiatives. We've put in place an initiative to enable collaboration across the organisation. We really needed to do this in a very structured way. As I said before, as a company, we're extremely hierarchical, but we needed ways to really bring people together dynamically, really dynamic people from different cultures, working in topics across the globe. T-Systems is a very international company, so half of our employees in Germany and half are in another 22 or 23 countries. So there we've got a mixture of cultures, so we really needed to enable those to work together without the need to travel, because cost is always a challenge, plus the time to travel. But we're also driven by this kind of research where there's a huge amount of savings by doing WebExes and doing virtual communities. The other thing that I believe and has worked very well for us in T-Systems with communities is really hitting on the innovation, getting people sharing things together, working together on something, bringing different perspectives in. So this has really helped a lot. And also looking at duplicated content. This is really a big challenge that we've addressed by implementing communities. Now we have these global communities across T-Systems around the topics, which enables people to actually work together without having to do it on their own or start from scratch. They can take something that's been done before and use it or learn from somebody's experience in the past. So that's why we put in place a program called Communities, and again we had to get an agreement for that in a different board meeting, and this was actually we did that prior to working virtually, and this was very quickly accepted, and this is now a very, very successful program across T-Systems, to the point that we're also coaching other parts of the business in this topic. So in Telecom Germany, Telecom Europe, actually T-Mobile as well at the moment as well. So if we look at why it's been successful, if we take the next slide, one of the key things that was very good for us is to differentiate the types of communities out in the world. It's very easy, everybody in these days with social networking, with all of these tools, with Twitter, with LinkedIn, with Facebook, often used in the wrong context in business, but it's easy to call all of those things some form of a community. We view communities as a holistic thing which includes content, communication, collaboration, best practice sharing. So this looks at all elements of work across the business, and it's very, very much tied to the organisation. So our communities of practice very much support our strategic goals. We have around 45 communities overall, of which around 20 are very strategically focused. So that might be something like cybersecurity as an example, which is one of our key differentiators in the market, and it's something that we like to connect people with internally on this topic. Of course, there are other things happening in our telecom social network. People are connecting and collaborating there in social networks, and communities of interest are coming up. But we built a Communities of Practice program which has really enabled this collaboration. So it's really important for us that it's a strategic topic. They are all governed and supported by an executive sponsor. A leader is aligned to this community, and they have a core team in this community. This core team is voluntary, but they're very engaged in the topics. We normally ask that it's part of their day job to do this community work. The communities set goals together, so it meets the needs of all of the core members and the needs of the business, and they have regular meetings, regular calls, so that a lot of those meetings are virtual, and then they have best practice sharing activities. We also expect that they have a minimum of English and possibly also German if they need that. Of course, in a transition space. Sometimes you are balancing 50-50 English-German, and that's totally fine while we evolve to more of a global footprint. So we expect that they use a variety of tools, but we really like them to use our online collaboration tool to register within the community so that they make themselves very visible to everybody else. So this is some of the key criteria for our community topic. Before I move on to the next slide, I'm just wondering if anyone has any questions or any comments they would like to make.
Yeah, Karen, there's a question in the chat box specifically about the communities. So thanks, Jeffrey, for contributing that question. How are these communities organized? Any structures or leaders designated? We know that there are the champions, but if you could talk a little bit deeper about those communities, there's curiosity there. Thanks.
Yeah, sure. So we have, I kind of covered it, but you can't read it on this last slide. So we have an executive sponsor. So we established for the initiative, working virtually and communities together, a governance to drive this across T-Systems. So we select the topics through the governance, and we appoint a leader to the community through the governance. Okay, and then we have a sponsor, a leader, and a core team within that community. And we try and enable them with support people, with funding through our qualification, skilling budgets. And we centralize from a central small team, we enable them with tools and mechanisms to make those communities work. So for our strategic communities of practice, it's very much assigned. It's not an additional, it's not their full-time job, it's part of the way that they work. So we add on top of their job some expected skills and help them to be better at leading through virtual communities. I hope that answers the question. I think it was Jeffrey you said, didn't you, Jeff, or Jeffrey?
That's right, thank you for that. And you prepared those champions very specifically for that too.
The champions we have actually designated to help enable the community members to be better at virtual work. Because what happens when you actually create a community, people go into it and then a few months later they say, why isn't this working? Why aren't people collaborating? And of course it's at this point we need to talk about how you build successful virtual communities, how you develop trust, how you build the openness for people to share, what mechanisms you can put in place to activate participation within a virtual community. And that's what we do from a central team perspective, and we try and distill that through the champion role and the community that Fiona was talking about earlier. So to give an example, the Working Virtually community today has something like 450 followers in it and about 350 members. So there's a lot of participation in that arena to help drive that across the company.
Yeah, that's right. And if I can just add to what Karen said, if you look at the community program across T-Systems, the numbers are even larger there. So you're looking at around 13,000 followers and over 10,000 members. So it's really a massive contingent and large portion of the organization who is using social network to collaborate and share and learn more.
Yeah, and as we said, the communities use a variety of tools, so that they're the visible members in one tool that we use, but there are, if we ask the communities, the leaders themselves, the members that they believe that they should have or have participating in their wider tools, they estimate there's about 20-ish thousand in total overall. So that's about just under half of the company size that should be in those communities, and that's just 22 topics. If we look at more topics, and obviously it's a lot more people. And that's of course what we can see. You can never be completely clear about who's taking part and using stuff that you're not aware of. People can dip in and out of those without being a member or a follower, attend calls without being a member or a follower, and that we can't manage that, all that data. We don't have that data to hand for us. Is there any other questions on that for now, or should I move on to my next slide?
So Karen, there's another question in the question box from Susan around, could you share some specific examples of typical changes or learning that you've experienced coming out of the community work?
Or learnings out of community work, yeah, quite a lot of years of experience in this topic. I think for me, one of the major things and the experiences that I could say about community work, it's really, if we're talking about communities of practice, I wouldn't say the same for interest communities. The key driver to make communities of practice work is having a good governance behind it. If you don't have a governance, it's not going to work. This is something that I see very clear. Another thing that I would say is the placement of the person or the people that are working on this topic, driving this topic in the company, is critical, and it's different in different businesses and different companies specifically. I've been in a situation where it's been in the strategy department. At the moment, I'm a direct report into the HR director, so the head of HR for T-Systems, because it's a sufficiently new topic and it doesn't really fit anywhere. What I can see evolving is this digital place, the digital working, the working in a digital age topic. It will fit within this umbrella somehow in informal learning, this kind of thing. So key thing, governance, placement of you in the team, being empowered and supported. You really need leadership. It really helps an awful lot. You are very, very, very dependent on the will, the energy and the drive of leaders. They can be appointed, but if they don't want that appointment, they won't do it. That's simple. Probably my biggest learning has been, and I learned a lot of pains on the way to do this, I invest my energy where there is energy. If I find a closed door, I do not try and knock it down. What I learned over time is if you try and do this, you put a lot of good energy down the drain. And what I realized is if I focus on those with energy, you go a very long way, and those that are skeptical will catch up. That's what I learned over time. So for me, they were the key things around community work. Yeah.
Fantastic, Karen. Let's move on to your next slide. We have one more question that we want to pose, but think it might fit a little bit later. So you can go ahead and to the next slide.
Yeah, I have one more slide on just how we approach the planning for communities, and then very happy to take any questions on both the topics of working virtually and communities of practice. So we have a very clear community life cycle planning methodology for our communities, and this you can see on the slide now. All of this material actually in these slides you can get in the Working Virtually videos just for your information, so feel free to go and have a look at those to get them. We work through a cycle very regularly with our community leaders. So just recently I've had 2-hour meetings with all of them, looking at their 2016 plans, seeing where they are. So first, when we initiate a community, we get an agreement from our governance. We look at the topics, we explore the topics, we bring topics together. And we're at a stage now of maturity where we see some communities merging, which is really a good sign that the organisation is maturing. When we get started, and we believe in, rather than training classes in a room or a structured training, we do it much more in a coaching methodology. As Fiona said earlier, we conduct all of our work more often in a virtual situation. So we have a lot of online tools, and we do virtual WebExes, and we give training sessions. We help them online with setup. We deal with things, we jump into their specific communities. We provide them with planning templates, communication templates, scripting, whatever they need to help them. The interesting thing in getting started is it's very, very, very dependent on the maturity of the part of the business, the topic, the leader, the sponsor, and everything that's going on in the organisation at any moment in time. So if, for example, it's the quarter closing at the end of the year, there's not much happening now, but at the beginning of the year there'll be a lot. There might be new topics, there could be restructuring going on. So these all impact how quickly you get started and how fast you can ramp up. So the building momentum, and I can think of experiences, and probably Fiona can as well, where we started with some communities and in 2 or 3 weeks they're running. I can also think of examples, it took us 8 months to build up before they even did a launch and could start to think about building this momentum. But those have been very thorough cases where they're really developing new products and services, looking at transformation topics, so they need a very structured plan. Of course, we frequently ask our community leaders and the core team to look at what they're doing, renewing their commitment, and we've just done that really now with the 2060 planning sessions. Where are they, what they're doing next year, what did they achieve this year, how are they going to position themselves? And at the moment we're actually maturing nicely in the organisation, where we start to talk about them communicating much more through storytelling, across the organisation and making their great work more visible, which quite often you can't see all of that. And of course there are cases where they stop or they reinvent themselves. We have a couple of communities undergoing a major reinvention at the moment. We don't have any stopping right now, so we're in a good way, and community building is, and the planning for them is there, and we support them with that, as I said, through coaching. So that's a very, very high level. We haven't put any specifics about communities in there, but happy to take any questions, as I said, on this topic, or also the working virtually topic towards Fiona.
So we have a question here from Jeffrey again, who's specifically focused on measuring the success of it. So how do you evaluate the results or the effect of these initiatives in the organization? Could you speak a little bit about how you're giving that return on investment perspective back to those key stakeholders that have championed this?
Yeah, I mean, we can both probably answer on this. Maybe Fiona, in a minute, you want to pick up the statistical part, and I'll talk about the other part of it. So, you know, it's very difficult to measure these topics. And what we try to do is bring into things like the Pulse survey, which is our employee survey across the company, to get a feeling of people's use of virtual methods, flexible working modules, which is mobile work, working from home, their satisfaction as an employee, and see if we can tie these things together. So we look at questions in the survey that we can leverage to give us an indication, and that's one thing that we do. We also make it explicitly clear it's very, very difficult to show the value of a changed behaviour in a person. Yeah, it's also very difficult quite often to show the value of why people should be in a community. What we are seeing and hearing is that the stories are giving a really good impetus to it. So if we take examples of a couple of stories from communities recently, somebody was saying communities aren't doing very much, there's not enough activity, and my argument to them, or a comment back to them, was actually that's really not true. We have one particular community, they delivered a really great value presentation for a customer that's been reused with 100 customers now, and they've skilled across 200 people on this topic within the business. It's difficult to quantify in money what that is worth, but it's definitely known that reusing content and best practice is valuable. Yeah, so we create stories to let people know. Another example in a community is, you know, they're deeply embedded in developing new offerings, and there's very, very long, hundreds of steps in this offering process. And this community is working extremely closely together through this offering process to close off all those different steps. And I'm talking several hundred, you know, 500-ish steps. And they're working extremely closely together, and without the collaboration in the community to gather input to the offering, what's right, what's wrong, what work, what they need, what the customers need, they would not be able to develop that so quickly. Again, hard to give figure facts, but you know that it is valuable and needed to develop fit-for-purpose offerings for the business. Yeah, so these are some of the softer things that we do. And Fiona's doing actually the reporting for both our initiatives, so maybe Fiona, you'd like to expand on those a bit.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Karen. Yeah, so like Karen said, it is very difficult to report on some things. So when we're looking at the overall program, what we tend to focus on is definitely those things that are easily quantifiable. So if you're looking, for example, at our Working Virtually platform, there we count, of course, our hits that we have on our videos as well as the learning hours. And just as an example, I can tell you that they number close to 14,000 hours since we started. So I think that's a great boost to show how informal learning is shaping the landscape of the digital future in that way. If we look at the communities themselves, beyond the number of communities we have, some of our communities number over thousands of people per community, and as I said earlier, numbering tens of thousands in total. What is very interesting coming out of both the virtual working and the community way of working is that as I mentioned, informal learning has picked up greatly. So instead of having people in classrooms, lecture halls, having to spend time traveling, having that person out of the office, having to focus on a 2-day session that turns into a 3-day session if you add in the travel, we've got people learning online, sharing information, best practices, content in their community calls. And we're actually busy collecting some of those figures at the moment, and I can tell you that they are numbering in the millions, quite frankly. So that's really good news for us, and just shows how learning is also changing as technology allows it to.
That's really fantastic. Those measurable outcomes are so elusive. You've done a great job of looking at the big data and distilling it down to something that is measurable and communicable to the leadership to drive that champion level partnership and support from the organization. So thanks for that. We have one kind of closing question for today's session, and let me hand that over to Ken.
So Karen and Fiona, where do you see this going in the future? I mean, you've talked a lot about the collaboration, working in a digital age, the state of learning in the organization. Where do you see this going within, both short-term and long-term in the future?
Yeah, so from my side, it's Karen again. So this is definitely an evolution story. Yeah, we know we started somewhere, we've come a long way. We build a lot of credibility with this in the company, not just in T-Systems, but the wider telecom. And with the digitalization topic coming through and the changing workplace and the way that people are doing their work, people bringing their own devices into the office, agile methodology, we see this being embedded more and more in the business. My ultimate goal would be to be out of a job where this is embedded in the business and we're not needing a central team to drive this anymore. It is a way of work. I'm sure that elements like working virtually will need to be embedded in the skilling topics, working in digital ways, the soft things that have always been trained but slightly in a different way. That would be my dream, is that we could take ourselves out of a community topic, and this is part of the future of work in the way that we are as a company. I don't know, Fiona, if you'd like to add to that at all.
Yeah, I can also add that definitely if you look at the way that work has changed over the last couple of decades, virtual teams were not thought of years ago. So working across cultures and working with very different team members with very different perspectives and views on how to approach work and how to deal with other cultures that need is growing rapidly as we become more global, not only as an organization but connected in the world. So things really are changing, and I can only second Karen's opinion, saying that yeah, hopefully at some stage that will all be embedded in the skills process. But yeah, I think it's a bit of a way to go, and we'll see what happens there. I think exciting times ahead for all of us if we look at all these changes.
Yeah, I agree, and what we can see from T-Systems, the topics are being adopted across telecom, and telecom's a big company and there's a journey to go on. We're on a 4.5-year journey in T-Systems, some of them in a different place, and of course have a different opinion, and I think that's why when we talk about evolution, we're very happy to move on from what we've done and evolve into something else with our our partner organisations. Yeah, it's quite important for us that we're happy to mature. Yeah.
And just one additional thought as a benefit to this transition and this transformation of the organization is, the latest research says that there's about a 60% level of employees around the world who are going to be looking for a job, a borderless job, right? Not bound by an office, not bound by geographic proximity to their home. And that represents a great kind of differentiator for T-Systems as an employer of choice as well. And I know you're under the HR banner and the organization within T-Systems. Has that factored in at all, or is that remaining to be seen? What is the result of kind of positioning yourself as an employer of choice and championing the working virtually concept?
I mean, we are as an organization living this already. You know, we have employees all around the world that are working cross-culture. We have a huge amount of job exchange situations happening within the business where people are doing cross-country work for a period of time. They're going into projects in different parts of the world. So we actually live this already in T-Systems, and of course we support them with the toolkit that we've got here to help them work across cultures. Yeah? So we are definitely, we're already working very much in this way. Whether that's visible externally, I'm not so sure, but that is definitely the way that we live and work in T-Systems today.
If I can add there, I think the fact that I'm based in South Africa, working with Karen, who is based in Germany, is indicative of that. I get to travel very infrequently, so I don't often see Karen or the rest of the team face-to-face. And I think the faith and the drive in the company is growing.
Yeah, just as an example there, we developed the whole Working Virtually initiative as a virtual team. We never all met as a team together, and we'd put about 5,400 hours of creation into that. We had a project team with different stakeholders that we never ever physically met in person, of about 15-ish people working with us to develop the videos, to do animations, to do the voice recording and the voiceover, to do the cutting. We did a lot of the, well, actually Fiona and I did most of the content build there, the design elements, but this was activated with, as I said, with a virtual team, and we never met. We never got a chance to have a celebration dinner at the end of that. So we kind of living it, as we said.
And a case in point for success as well, so thank you for that. I'm just checking the question box, and one last go around between the two of you, Karen and Fiona, if there's any other additional thoughts you wanted to contribute that maybe you wanted to see if we had any extra time available to add some last comments before we wrap up.
Fiona, do you want to add anything there?
I think I've mentioned everything that I'd like to. Possibly, as a last note, is for all the participants on the call to think about not only building content in the background in a virtual environment, but even implementing the cultural navigator was done over distance and involved very different people from different parts of our organization that had to come together and connect all the dots and virtually get that result and make the tool a success across the organization.
I'd agree with that, and for me there were two additional points as well. So I think the first point here is you need, when you're building change programs, it's very easy to start getting very specific. And you do need to be specific in what you implement, but when you start with your scoping and your description, keep it sufficiently high enough that you can bring things in. Because if you, like when we started this topic 4.5 years ago to where it ended when we launched it, it's very more mature, much richer than we could have thought about when we started. So keep that high level scope sufficient that you can bring other topics in where you need to. And I think that Fiona would agree with the next one. You really need some resilience. If you don't have resilience and you haven't got a strong stomach, then don't start. Because when you're pushing change, you're pushing the negative, you're pushing people to do things. Why would they change when everything's fine? You're trying to do things against resistance. This is very difficult. You need a very strong leader behind you, and you really do need a very small core people like Fiona and I and a number of others have worked very, very closely for a long time, and to be honest, we've energized each other through this. What's nice, after that is that now we start to get some visibility, credibility, acknowledgement. For example, we didn't mention this figure earlier, but the Working Virtually videos had about 77,000 views, just as an example. This is considerable, like 14,000 learning hours that we've done in those videos. We could never have done that in a classroom environment. So it starts to pay off, but you need resilience.
Absolutely. What a great way to kind of wrap up this initiative that creating change and sustaining change in an organization. Leave that idea with the last topic of resilience and sticking with it. So thank you. Karen, Fiona, what a wonderful presentation and representation of the hard work that you have put into this, and we look forward to partnering with you as you continue to move this change and transform the organization for the next stage. So thank you on behalf of Ken and myself. Thank you so much for your time. Thanks to all the participants, and we will see you next time in 2016 in our next TMC Roundtable.